The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker was a magical experience. In my opinion, it was the first 3D Zelda game to create a true open world, and I think it was incredibly successful with that for its time. The game came out over 20 years ago now, so the fact that you could travel from one side of the map to the other without any loading screens was incredible and extremely impressive. Let's be honest, by today's standards, the map of The Wind Waker was not that big, but at the time, it felt huge and vast, and it begged to be explored. In this video, I wanted to take a look at how Wind Waker is fundamentally similar to Breath of the Wild, and by association, since they share a map, Tears of the Kingdom. I also want to discuss how Tears of the Kingdom could look to Wind Waker for direction on how to create a Zelda game that merges some of the older Zelda mechanics many of us miss, like large themed dungeons for instance, with the beautiful open world that Breath of the Wild gave us. Before we start talking specifics, I wanted to give a little bit of background on the Wind Waker for people who may not have played the game or know much about it. The game came out in 2002 for the Nintendo GameCube, and although it's generally looked on with a positive light now, that wasn't the case at the time. Upon release, a lot of people expressed negativity towards the game's cartoony art style. People at the time wanted a realistic Zelda game, so when they saw Wind Waker, many were disappointed. In fact, Twilight Princess, the next entry in the Zelda series released in 2006, was a direct response to that feedback. Twilight Princess had darker themes, a more realistic art style that did not age super well, by the way, and even came with a T for Teen rating. On a side note, I think this initial negativity towards Wind Waker is funny looking back because this game has arguably aged the best out of all the Zelda games precisely because of its cartoony art style that did not try to be realistic. Games from that time period with realistic art styles, like Twilight Princess, didn't age as well because what looked realistic back then looks pretty outdated now. Anyway, Wind Waker takes place after Ocarina of Time, in a timeline where Link did not save Hyrule. Ganon won, and therefore Hyrule was flooded as a last-ditch effort to rid the world of evil. Wind Waker's world sits on top of the flooded Hyrule, and the player even makes their way down to the seafloor during the game and into Hyrule Castle a few times. In the game, the player starts off at Link's home, Outset Island. From there, aside from some barriers you need to overcome, mainly at the beginning of the game, you can sail to any of the islands on the 7x7 square map, which, if you're bad at math, is 49 squares total. Now, not all of these squares have an island that's very intricate, or even has an entrance to go inside somewhere with more content. I assume this is due to limitations of a game made for the GameCube in 2002. That being said, some islands do have substantial content. The same way you can sail anywhere else, there are many islands you can visit where you'll find large and intricate dungeons to explore. The first dungeon you visit is on Dragon Roost Island. You arrive on this island by sailing on your boat. Once you arrive, you don't hit a loading screen until you traverse some paths and make your way through a door into where the Rito live. As you progress through the storyline, you'll eventually find yourself entering the dungeon itself, Dragon Roost Cavern. You complete this dungeon, beat the boss, go back to your boat that you left on the coastline, and make your way to the next island you want to visit. As I already said, with the exception of a few artificial barriers, mostly at the beginning of the game when you're still in the tutorial stage, you can pretty much go wherever you want on the map, whenever you want. But just because you can get there doesn't necessarily mean that you can do something there. You might go out exploring and find a new island just to realize that you need bombs to access a hole or a cave. You don't have bombs yet, so you're forced to progress through the game some more and come back when you're better equipped. I imagine this style of gameplay that essentially requires backtracking rather than rewarding exploration is disliked by many. What I just described, being able to go wherever you want, whenever you want in the Wind Waker, is basically the whole philosophy of Breath of the Wild. The map in Breath of the Wild is obviously far larger and more vast compared to Wind Waker, but they both emphasized exploration and freedom. I think that at the time in the early 2000s, Nintendo simply couldn't create an open world the way they likely wanted to due to hardware restrictions. Breath of the Wild took the freedom and exploration philosophy that was at the core of Wind Waker and made it bigger and better in every way, while eliminating the backtracking and essentially the punishment that the Wind Waker had if you were to explore an area earlier than the game wanted you to. When I think about what I want from Tears of the Kingdom, as I do a lot these days, I can't help but draw comparisons between what I want and the Wind Waker. The way exploration worked in that game was mostly by sailing around the Great Sea with no loading screens, as I've said before. I think an ideal situation for me would be a combination of old Zelda elements, the difficult, uniquely themed dungeons, along with a large open world to explore. Essentially, a fully realized version of what Wind Waker tried to be. If I could play Tears of the Kingdom and run around, finding these large dungeons that are more reminiscent of older Zelda games with no markers indicating where exactly they are, I would be so excited to explore every inch of the map looking for them. Similar to Wind Waker, oftentimes when you sailed to a new square on the map, you had no idea what would be there. You just had to go and check it out for yourself. Let me give you 2 examples to explain how I think dungeons could work in Tears of the Kingdom, keeping in mind how Wind Waker was structured. Imagine exploring the world of Hyrule in Tears of the Kingdom as you did in Breath of the Wild. You see a massive mountain in the distance, and you decide that you want to climb it and see what you find. In Breath of the Wild, there's a 99% chance that you just find a Korok. But in Tears of the Kingdom, what if you found a bombable wall? You blow it up, and you're met with the entrance to a massive dungeon hidden in the caves within the mountain. You climb a ladder down into the mountain and look around, trying to figure out how to proceed. I would want this dungeon to be large and complicated, with unique enemies, and more reminiscent of older Zelda games rather than the divine beasts in Breath of the Wild. Perhaps you obtain an item in the dungeon, maybe a claw shot, which would help you get to high spots in the cavernous area that you could have gotten to by climbing, but they're simply accessed faster and more efficiently with this item. At the end, you defeat a unique and scary boss before exiting out of the dungeon on the ground floor of the mountain. Another example that I think would be awesome and add to the sense of exploration in Tears of the Kingdom would be having dungeons that are discoverable underwater. Imagine if in Tears of the Kingdom, the Zoras gave you a special kind of armor or item that allowed you to breathe underwater. Iron boots would also be helpful, as you could then use them to walk around on the bottom of a body of water. I'm imagining finding a body of water and diving in, putting on iron boots so I could sink to the bottom. I walk or swim around and come across a strange hole in the sand. I fall down into it and boom, I'm in a dungeon. I think that finding dungeons in the ways that I described, by truly exploring the world, would be very similar to the first Zelda games and would add a lot of complexity and exploration to the game. I strongly believe that these dungeons should be found without markers telling you exactly where to go, like what was done for the divine beasts in Breath of the Wild. And that would create an amazing experience that would truly incentivize you to explore and get to know the world and how you can interact with it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you liked this video, and let me know in the comments what your thoughts are after watching it. I'm currently working on a Breath of the Wild playthrough on my channel if you're interested, and I'll be doing a Tears of the Kingdom playthrough as soon as that game comes out. But for now, have a good one.